Howdy from Austin and welcome back. It's now time to get into implementing our sales backend API for the signup page. In terms of workflow, we're going to let the signup page drive the requirements of our sales backend. So looking at the signup page, I want to find all of the places where the front end needs to make requests to our backend. Not to get too nerdy here, but really we've already made a request from our browser to our sales backend when we loaded the signup page. When I navigated to localhost 1337/signup with the browser, the sales web server passed our request to the router, which parsed the request, in this case /signup, and matched it with a handler in the routes.js file, ultimately responding with this view. So now that we have the signup page rendered on our browser, what other elements in the page do we need to make requests? There are at least 3 different elements that will make requests to the sales backend API. They include / when the user clicks the activityOverlord 2.0 logo, to /login when the user clicks the sign in button, and to /signup when the user clicks the create account button. I'm going to implement the request to /signup first. Now, some of you might be wondering, wait, we've already handled a request to /signup. And that's true, but it's to get /signup, where get is the HTTP verb that the browser typically uses to request web pages. This new request, however, will use the HTTP verb post, as in post /signup. If this is starting to make your head spin, get your balance and head over to this episode, which explains HTTP routing in nauseating detail. Actually, I hope it's not really nauseating. Okay, this post /signup request will take the gathered contents of this form and send it to the sales server via an AJAX request from Angular. So let's set this up and go back into our text editor. But wait a minute, this isn't Sublime. Now, I love Sublime Text, but I wanted to experiment with the Atom editor from GitHub for the next several episodes. Anyway, we're in signup.ejs, and we need to implement this function that the ng-submit directive is pointing to, submit signup form. But where do we declare this function? We'll declare it in our controller, which we pointed to via the ng-controller directive here. The actual controller code is contained in a file named signupcontroller.js by convention, because really we could have named the file foo. So here's where we actually created the controller. So I'll declare the function here, but this function has no connection or binding to the markup. We'll use the Angular scope object to make this connection. Angular characterizes the scope object as the glue between the controller and directives in the markup. So on the one hand, we have controllers contained in JavaScript files, and on the other, we have directives contained in the markup. And the scope object is used as the bridge between them. So let's fire up Sales using Sales Lift and go into the Chrome browser and navigate to localhost 1337/signup. And as you can see here, we've got an error. Our scope object has not been defined. What's happened is the scope has not been injected into our function, but we can easily remedy that by passing the scope as an argument into the function. Now when we refresh the browser, we no longer have an issue. But we're not out of the woods yet. Angular determines a controller's dependencies from the arguments to the controller's constructor function. So if we minify our JavaScript for the signup controller, all of the function arguments, including scope, would be minified as well. So scope could turn into the letter A, and Angular's dependency injector would not be able to identify services correctly. But there's an easy fix here. I can add an array to the constructor here that adds a string for scope, and since strings aren't minified, Angular has a way to match the name with the argument. Let's go back into the browser and refresh and make sure everything works. Okay, great. Next, we'll enable the loading states we created in the previous episode. I'll set up the initial loading state by adding another attribute to the scope object. Now, don't be confused by my adding the signup form attribute between the scope object and the loading attribute. I'm just going to namespace everything concerning the signup form under this attribute. So when our submit signup form function is executed, we want the loading state to change to true. If we look at the markup and specifically the create account button, you can see what's changing based upon the loading state. If the loading state is false, the button will display the create account text. If it's true, the button will display our spinner animation with the text preparing your account within the button. Okay, let's see if this all works. I'll go back to the sign-up page, and since we have validation, I need to put in some valid values, and when I click the Create Account button, you can see the loading state change. So now let's add the AJAX request to our function, and we're going to do that with an Angular service HTTP. If you've ever done an AJAX request in jQuery, this is going to look very familiar. First, let's inject it into the function and the array like we did the scope object. So we're going to put in the path and any data we want to send with the request. In order to bind the form fields to these data attributes, we're going to use the scope again. And remember, the scope is linking the values that we're capturing in the markup via the ngModel directive. So let's do that for the rest of our fields in the form. We've got title and email and password. Okay, great. Now let's declare our success and error handlers. So on success, I want to change the location of the browser to /user. This has the effect of making a GET request to /user. If the request generates an error, I want to catch that error and for now, just log the response. Finally, I'll create this catch-all function, and either way, I want to reset the loading state back to false. We're now going to transition from the front end to the back end, from the Angular framework to the sales framework. Our goal is to create a user by gathering up account information and sending it to sales. So let's implement some stuff and then I'll circle back and explain what we did in more detail. Head over to the terminal and type sales generate API user. With this simple set of commands and a bunch of tools and automation from sales, we have almost everything we need for our API. Start the sales server by typing sales lift. Because we created a model, sales is asking us a question about migrations. We'll come back to this. For now, I'm going to use the second option, alter. Next, let's go into the browser and navigate to localhost 1337/user. We've just used one of Sales' blueprint shortcut actions. By navigating to /user, we made a GET request to the server for all the user records. And since we haven't created any records yet, not surprisingly, we get an empty array. But using the create action blueprint shortcut, I'll create our first user record, Humphrey Bogart. Sales also has blueprint REST or RESTful actions. From within Postman, really one of the best tools on the planet for testing routes, I'll make a post request to /user with these route parameters for our next user, Amy Mann. Chances are you'll create your own controller actions by the time you get to production. However, blueprints are incredibly useful in the design phase of your API. If you're interested in learning more about blueprint capabilities, head over to this episode where I break them down in a bunch of detail. So the path we want to associate with create a user is /signup. So head back into the editor and open up config/routes.js. I'm going to add the route post/signup, which will be handled by the user controller.create action. Let's restart sales and navigate to the signup page. Finally, I'll sign up my hero, Nikola Tesla. And there's our list of records. So briefly, I want to go over what we've done. We created a route that connects the request to a controller in action. When the API was created, Sales provided us with a user controller and a create action via blueprints automatically. Sales also created a user model that has methods like create, find, update, and destroy. Finally, the user model can retrieve and save records from a variety of different databases via adapters. In the next episode, we'll transition from Sales blueprints to our own custom action. I'll also introduce a brand new sales concept, node machines. Thanks as always for watching, and be sure to follow me on Twitter and sign up for the Salescast mailing list. And go check out and sign up for the beta of the sales team's latest creation, Treeline.io.